All right. Welcome, everybody, coming into the room here. Maybe I'll give folks a minute as I'm seeing more people joining. Great. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started here as we have a lot to cover in the next hour. So, welcome everybody to the Colorado Safe Routes to School webinar series. This is a part two of a two-part series of how to create a simple, streamlined safe routes project action plan. And today we're going to be talking about turning that action plan, which we spoke about kind of in a more high-level sense at our last session, into we're going to talk about how to turn that into real action. So thanks to Colorado Department of Transportation for sponsoring this webinar today, open to folks all across the country. My name's Laura Harris. I'm the Technical Assistance Manager here of Safe Routes Partnership and joined by Corey. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm Corey Johnson, our Senior Program and Engagement Manager here at the partnership, joining you from a very sunny but chilly Baltimore, Maryland today. Nice to see you all.
Thanks. And I'm joining from a beautiful spring day in New Orleans. All right, so we'll move on. So we would love it if folks could also introduce themselves in the chat. If you could share your name, where you're chiming in from, what kind of connection to Safe Routes, or even if you're just getting started and you have no connection, I can share that. Also, FYI, May is National Bike Month, so let us know how you're getting ready for that. So, about the partnership, our mission is to advance safe walking and rolling to and from schools and in everyday life, improving the health and well-being of people of all races, income levels, abilities, building healthy, thriving communities for everyone. We have a couple updates to share from Colorado Safe Routes to School. Um, we have the recording we're going to be sharing from part one, and the final webinar of the school year will be taking place on Tuesday, May 12th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. A couple reminders about the Zoom. Please, you can go ahead and share any comments. Please share any resources if you have any awesome resources about some of the stuff we're talking about. You can share in the chat box. If you have questions, we'll hopefully, if we have time for Q&A at the end, drop those in the Q&A box, and we will be recording and sharing this webinar. Some of our objectives today is we're going to, talk about partnerships that can support Safe Routes programs. We're going to talk about how to use data to guide your decision making. We'll talk about evaluation and how to measure success and strategies for implementation. So I'll pass off to Corey to do a brief recap of session one.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to see you. So we started off talking about action planning in our webinar last month, and I dropped a link in the chat if you didn't get a chance to catch action planning part one. Please feel free to take a look at that link and kind of to get a sense of what we talked about last time, and then the session to really build off of our part one session. So if you missed action planning part one, we did a little previously on the Colorado Safe Routes to School webinar series. We did an introduction to Safe Routes to School action planning, including going over some very specific requirements for our Colorado Safe Routes to School grant applicants. So there are some things that are very specific to Colorado, since this is a CDOT webinar. So make sure if you're planning on applying and you're in Colorado to check out your CDOT requirements. If you're in other communities, make sure that you check out the requirements for your state or city or county. We also talked about some different project types, infrastructure versus non-infrastructure, and how to include those in an action plan. And we also created an action plan checklist, which I can also drop the link to that in the chat as well. And if you go to the next slide, the action plan checklist includes all the things that we recommend including in a strong Safe Routes to School action plan. So title, timeline, description, your goals and objectives, budget, partnerships, community engagement, equity considerations, implementation, evaluation, and sustaining efforts. We also asked you all to kind of chime in and share some of your project goals for the next year. So we heard that you all want to work on lots of different things from, bike rodeos, walking school buses, safety improvements, building a culture of walking and biking. We hear that a lot, and thinking about how to, shift modes within your community, involving more community members in decision making, nurturing school champions, doing walk audits, and planning for implementation. So there's a lot of great stuff coming up, and we hope that this session can kind of help you take your planning to the next level and move you towards reaching some of these goals. We also, speaking of goals, heard some very specific goals from you all when it comes to what you're working on in Safe Routes to School. So a few that kind of, stuck out. Safer crossings across Main Street. Great. There's a, specific location and a very clear goal that you all are working towards. Implementing more traffic calming features. That's a great goal. So if you're thinking about applying for a demonstration project or doing an infrastructure grant, you can think about what types of traffic calming elements you want to include. Perform a walk audit at two elementary schools. Awesome. We'll be talking about walk audits a little bit later, and that's a great opportunity for you to both gain some critical data and also engage your community in safe routes. Also reaching smaller and/or rural communities. Yes, we love working with our small communities, rural communities. We've seen some great safe routes projects happening in smaller communities. So that's a really great goal as well. So thank you all for sharing your feedback during our last session. We definitely encourage you to continue sharing in the chat here during this session. And so speaking of the session, today we are going to focus on a few different parts of Safe Routes to School action planning and dive a bit deeper into some of the topics so we didn't get a whole lot we didn't really get into during our first session. So we're going to spend a bit of time today talking about partnerships, aligning your action plan with existing plans that may already be in place, a little bit about data collection and evaluation. That's always a big hot topic when it comes to safe routes. Implementation, and then we'll also share some examples from winning Colorado Safe Routes to School grant applications. So we're really going to start our conversation today talking about what really makes a strong Safe Routes to School project. And I think that a lot of you are already familiar with a lot of these things because we talked about them last time. And those of you who have done safe routes before are definitely, kind of used to some of the key parts of a strong safe routes project. So know that strong projects are data informed, uses a really comprehensive approach to thinking about the 6 E's of safe routes to school and building that into your project plan. We know that strong safe routes projects lead to equitable outcomes that benefit the students and families that need safe routes the most. They also outline short-term and long-term goals. So thinking about what can we do now, and then how are we building our project and our program to be sustainable over time. And we also know that Safe Routes to School is really fun. So we also really think about how to make your projects fun, joyful, and engaging, whether that's a walk and roll to school day or an infrastructure project that can also be fun and engaging for community members if you really think about how to build community engagement into your project plan. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura to talk a little bit about your project team and partners. We know that Safe Routes takes a lot of people to make it work. And so Laura's going to talk about who those people are and how they might be able to help you in your project planning process.
Thanks, Corey. Absolutely. So it certainly takes a team and a lot of partners being involved to have a successful Safe Routes project. So your team, probably some of the people you want to have on there include someone to coordinate the program. You need someone really to own it, set deadlines, things like that. You want to have school staff, of course, being involved in your Safe Routes to School program. We want to have city planners and engineers and those perspectives on the team. We want to have public health partners, parents and caregivers, as well as community advocates for safe walking and biking to school. Partnerships, are really important. As we said, Safe Routes to School is a multi-sector effort, and we really need to make sure that sort of all these folks are involved, kind of as I said on the next slide, previous slide. So here's kind of a more in-depth checklist. Maybe this looks like kind of a lot of folks here. You don't need to have everyone at the table right away. You really want to start with a core group, bringing in additional partners as needed. The goal is really to include people who kind of understand student travel, can really help implement solutions, and be, representative of the community. So that can look like within the school and district, principals, school administrators, teachers and school staff, parents, PTO representatives, students themselves, having the student voice in there is super important. Any kind of transportation or safety and operations staff, as well as leadership from the school district. You want to have in the local and government agencies part of the team, transportation planners, traffic engineers, public health. You want to make sure you're communicating any plans with law enforcement or school resource officers, getting involved elected officials or advisory committees. Having elected officials champion your project really goes a long way. And of course, parks and recreation or facility staff, especially if those parks are, part of that safe route to school. Community partners, there's all kinds of community-based organizations that could really help do a lot of the engagement and programming around safe routes to school activation. That can include bicycle pedestrian advocacy groups. A lot of them are the ones hosting bike rodeos and things like that. Faith and community leaders, local businesses, getting them involved can really go a long way. You want to make sure you engage the residents near schools, as well as youth serving organizations that can, again, really help with a lot of engagement and programming. And then, other folks you can also bring on the team might include regional planning organizations, state or county safe routes coordinators, engaging housing is always really important, as well as any kind of communication staff to just kind of make sure we're helping communicate and tell the story to the community along the way and doing these projects. So if folks could share in the chat, if there's one partner who you're thinking about in your project, maybe anything that's missing from this list or something that you feel is really important to anyone you particularly think would be important to bring on, please share in the chat. So in choosing the right partners, you want to ask a few questions. Who needs to be involved in developing the project idea? Who do we want to get involved in right from the get-go? Having folks being involved from the start is going to really help them feel ownership of the project and making sure that, we see through in a way that's sustained and successful. So you want to think about, who drafts things, who reviews things, and leads decisions. We want to think about who's going to continue to be involved after grant funds are, used up. Where are the gaps and what we need to fill? What projects, partners do we definitely have on board, but maybe you haven't talked to law enforcement or, some other people from the school district. So what are all the roles that you need to really make sure um, this is being supported? Seeing some cool comments. Principals, gym teachers have been a core part, definitely. They're big parts in implementing a lot of the programming and getting some of those encouragement efforts off the ground. So you want to make sure in your team you're really defining the roles and responsibilities of the team. This is kind of a basic table of how that could look when we think about those kind of different buckets within your partner team. So the school district is really going to be a big part of coordinating of schools, supporting data collection, like distributing caregiver surveys through school district communications. The city itself is going to have a huge part in the implementation aspect, especially regarding infrastructure improvements, implementing those and helping plan. The public health partner is going to be important in the data and outreach collection of your team. They might have a lot of the data that you need already to support the plan and as well can be very supportive in doing that community engagement through the channels they're already using. Community engagement, again, things like biking and walking, advocacy groups, youth groups will really help you do that direct connection with families and community members. And then, of course, a safe house to school coordinator, someone to really lead the project, manage timeline, coordinate partners, and do reporting and evaluation of the project. So our effective partnerships that really work, they're not just going to happen automatically. They really require intention. So we want to make sure that we're starting with a shared goal, like improving state safety, for students traveling to school. Clarify roles early so that partners understand their responsibilities. Um, Make sure that meetings have a purpose. Don't just meet for the sake of meeting. Have a clear agenda in advance, timelines, and clear follow-up and next steps. Make sure people leave knowing what they're responsible for and what happens next. Regular communication really helps keep everyone aligned. And importantly, partnerships are built over time through trust and collaboration, and trust comes from consistent communication, following through on commitments, and showing progress. So once you have a really good team in place, we want to think about aligning our data with plans and existing plans of data. So I'll pass to Corey for this.
Yeah, and I actually think this is one opportunity where some of your team members can help you out. I know that sometimes I have a hard time finding different plans or data sets. And so I rely on team members to either let me know where a plan is, or if there's a plan that's being updated, or if there's, something related to data collection that they can help me with. So those project partners are really key. So one thing that we had talked about in our last session is that when you go to start a project, that it's really helpful to review any existing plans that are already in place that can support your project. And so on the next slide, we'll talk about just share a few ways you can kind of use some existing plans and existing data to help inform your either grant application or your project idea. And I'll also share some examples of what this actually looks like in a winning Colorado Safe Routes to School grant. So one thing that a lot of grant reviewers or people who are in charge of project decision making really like is being able to connect your project to something that already exists in, maybe it's a school wellness policy, or maybe it's an existing Safe Routes to School plan, or Vision Zero plan, or safety action plan, or regional plan. And so, being able to kind of pull out some, key goals, key strategies, key locations from a plan that already exists will show that there's already been some thought put into the project idea that you're bringing to the table. So our suggestion is to see what plans already exist in your community. You might be able to find something on a school district website, city or county planning department, your regional planning department, state DOT, public health department, or just ask partners or local staff. They might have, an idea of what plans are already out there or what plans might already be in progress. And then you can kind of use that to help build your project idea. And then on the next slide, we have an example of what it looks like to reference the plan in your project action plan. So this is an example from a community in Colorado. They applied for a Safe Routes to School grant and got it. And they said that our town is developing a master plan for sidewalks and connectivity. This is a critical step in improving connectivity throughout the town and promoting walking and biking safety. And they kind of talk about how, sidewalk projects require investment and that they're seeking this funding to help them, complete the sidewalk connectivity plan and also bring in safe routes to school to make it safer for kids to be able to walk to the local elementary school. So they took an existing plan, referenced it very specifically, and included it as part of their grant narrative to show that this funding is actually in support of a larger plan that's already in progress. If we go to the next slide, another thing you all can take a look at is your Safe Routes to School data. And Laura will talk a bit more about what data collection looks like and, and how to access all of this. But we find that reviewing Safe Routes to School data, again, really helps you make the case for why you need this project, why you need this funding. And Safe Routes to School data it can include crash data, can include participation numbers, student travel tallies, even perceptions of safety. So if you've done a walk audit or had conversations with community members and they talk about those, spots in the community that just don't feel safe, all that can be a part of your Safe Routes to School data set. And again, where can you find this? Maybe it is online, maybe it's a school district website, maybe it's a, DOT, the police department. Sometimes they might have data. Sometimes the college or university partner might be in charge of some data sets. There are some communities where a local university might run a data center. That's happened when I worked in DC. Howard University managed all of the crash data for the entire city of Washington, DC. So check with your local university partners. or maybe it's a regional planning organization. So again, kind of see who might have that data really related to young road users and schools specifically. And then again, thinking about what this actually looks like in a winning grant application. This is another community in Colorado that talked about how school-related traffic congestion and safety issues impacted their communities, especially 68% of schools within half a mile of the high injury network. And that's roadways that accounted for 50% of fatalities in their city, but only 5% of surface streets. So again, they took a very specific data point, pulled it into their application to really make the case for why they needed to do the Safe Routes to School project. And having that data really strengthens their application and their case for why their Safe Routes project is really important. And lastly, we talked a little bit in our last session about equity data, what that looks like, and also how to incorporate equity data, especially now when, there are some grants where they either don't ask for equity data or might ask you to, kind of not use the term equity, but use something else. And so we also wanted to kind of talk about how you can still put equity into your project plan, even if you can't explicitly say this is an equity data point that we're looking at. So a few ways that communities have done this, looking at census tract data, asthma rates, air quality, demographic data, income data. And again, where to find that? Sometimes it's online. You can look at census data, the public health department, transportation department, school district departments, school districts might have some of this data as well. And again, thinking about like how do you actually reference equity within a project, a grant proposal or project plan. We have a few examples of what this can look like in a project narrative or in a plan. So on the next slide, we have a bit of guidance around how to reference equity without necessarily saying equity, if that's not something that you think would be good to put in your application right now. So first one, you're providing comprehensive access to walking and biking. Laura, I think that was your suggestion. That idea of like comprehensive access can mean that you want everybody to have access to walking and biking, and that can include communities of color, lower income communities, without explicitly saying that. We're improving walking and biking in areas of persistent poverty. So some of this language is actually pulled from USDOT, grant application guidance. And so we've seen them use things like areas of persistent poverty, making projects safer for high need communities. That's something else that we saw. So being able to like pull some of the language specifically from the grant application can also be another way to address equity. Highlighting child-friendly or family-friendly elements. That's been something that the federal level that grant reviewers have really liked to see, anything that's child-friendly or family-friendly. And also highlighting benefits to rural communities has been another way to get equitable outcomes in your grant narrative or in your action plan without explicitly saying the word equity. So a few other tips as you are thinking about, your project plans and your applications. I'd say read your grant application guidelines really carefully. Different states, different municipalities are doing different things and having different guidelines. So, kind of take your cues from what your grant guidelines say and what your funders are saying, and then write for that audience. So there's some applications where it's totally okay to go ahead and reference, equity and equitable outcomes. So, please do that if you feel that that is, appropriate and necessary for your application. For other communities, that might not be the case. You can also take a look and see if there are any examples of past applications that are posted online and see if you can use similar language to what communities have used that might have gotten funded, in the last year or two, and take cues from there. Then also just keep your narrative really focused. At the end of the day, we're here for, whether it's safety or physical activity or improving access for kids and families, really stick to the core of what we're doing when it comes to safe routes to school. So if you all have any additional, ideas or thoughts around incorporating equity into your applications or in your project plans, we'd love to hear them. Feel free to drop them in the chat, and we can compile some of those ideas and share them afterwards. And then, of course, once you're done, reviewing all the existing plans, reviewing the existing data, then it's really time for you to start building out your project. And so on the next slide, we won't go too deep into this because we already talked about them in the last webinar. But that's when you can really start thinking about your project location, identifying your goals, and selecting your activities. Again, using that information, that data from your kind of existing plan and data research and review, and using that to build out what you want your project to be. And then a little bit about once you kind of are starting to put your project together and really thinking about framing your project around safety, access, and need. So again, what are those core elements and core pieces that you're working on with your Safe Routes to School project? So the first one is just, you need to make the case. If you're putting together a grant proposal or an action plan, you need to show why this program or project is important. So describing barriers to safe walking and biking, prioritizing schools and communities with the greatest need, using data and existing plans to support your project focus, and being really specific about your activities, location, project partners, your goals for the project. And also using walk audit findings or other data sets to describe real world barriers to walking and biking. On the next few slides, we have a few examples of what this looks like. Again, in winning grant applications from Colorado, and these are part of these project action plans that were included as a part of the grant application. So this first example, the town is working to increase connectivity among pedestrian routes in town. The project area extends from the intersection of Highway 65 from Main Street to Northeast Apple Avenue, and it then goes on to talk about a segment of sidewalk that needs to be repaired. So again, this is very specific. Specific locations are included in here. It mentions that they need sidewalks in good condition. They want to include accessible ramps at all intersections and in front of the elementary school. So very specific, very clear what it is that they're trying to do here with their sidewalk project. Next slide. This is again an example from another winning application. This is a project idea for a Safe Routes to School initiative for high school. And again, it's very clear about what they want to do: create curriculum, expand the program to high schools, create new curriculum, educational models, and engagement events. And that the goal of this is to really grow the city's capacity to lead, and build their culture of safe routes to school and active transportation. So again, it's specific to what they want to do, and then also tied to some sort of longer term goal about building a culture of active transportation, which I think was one of the goals that somebody had put in the last session. And the next one, this is an example again from another winning application from Colorado. This is another Safe Routes to School action plan, and they wanted to do a whole town Safe Routes to School initiative. And one of their goals, again, was to kind of create a school and community culture that encourages active transportation. So one of their objectives was to lead 6 community engagement events across the elementary schools, and then 2 engagement events each summer to encourage walking, biking, and rolling to school. So again, very specific: 6 engagement events during the school year, 2 engagement events during the summer at elementary schools to encourage walking, biking, and rolling. And they went and they broke down the specific actions that they'll actually take to reach that goal and objective. So, they'll determine, when to have their event, look at the school calendar, figure out when works, what day works best. And they also incorporated who will be leading that, who will be in charge of doing that. So in this case, it'll be the Safe Routes School coordinator, and somebody shouted out PE teachers in the chat. PE teachers, they'll be the ones who'll be leading that process. They also want to assign school champions to help with these different engagement events. So they're going to work with the volunteer coordinator to do that. And so we have a few other examples from the same application on the next few slides. I won't go too in depth because I think you all will kind of get the point. But again, they have their big goal: establish a culture of active walking, active transportation. Another objective: engage at least 40 parents in volunteering with Safe Routes to School by June 2027. So again, very specific number, specific goal, specific timeline, and then who will do each part. So if they want to do some volunteer screening, they'll work on that with the Safe Routes to School coordinator and the volunteer coordinator. Recruiting parent volunteers and onboarding them, Safe Routes to School coordinator and volunteer coordinator. And then just the last one, they also wanted to evaluate changes in parent perception of about the importance of walking and biking by June 2027. So again, very clear goal, very clear action steps, and it's very clear who's doing what to achieve that goal. So these are just a few examples of how winning Safe Routes to School grant applicants have really thought about how to build out their action plan and be really thoughtful about making the case for why their project is important and also how they're working to accomplish it. So again, we'll share these examples and share the slide deck in our follow-up email. But these are great examples to follow as you all kind of build out your project plans. And I'll pass it over to Laura to talk a bit about data collection and evaluation, which people always have so many thoughts on and love to talk about. And hopefully Laura will give you some helpful tips and strategies for collecting data for your project.
Thanks, Corey. So, data matters. We know this. It really helps us move from assumption to evidence. It helps communities to identify safety concerns. It helps us, to understand where the issues exist. For example, crash data can show high-risk corridors. Walk audits can highlight unsafe crossings, missing sidewalks. It can help us decide where to focus. You might want to prioritize schools of higher crash rates, lower rates of walking and biking, or higher need populations, or schools that you know have very limited infrastructure. Um, Measuring change over time, data allows us to track that progress, taking student travel tallies before and after a project to see if more students are walking and biking. Data is especially important for funding and reporting. If you can show increased participation in programs, improved perception of safety from surveys, proving reduced congestion near schools, that's going to really help you to be able to implement more projects. Um, Data helps us answer questions of, where should we focus and what difference did we make? So the types of data that we kind of consider safe routes data, some of the common data sources might include things like parent, caregiver surveys. It helps us, kind of understand why families are making the choices that they do. Again, walk audit observations really help us understand what conditions on the ground actually look like. Crash data helps us understand where safety concerns exist, where safety concerns are actually happening. And student travel tallies helps us understand, what students are doing. So we'll talk about a few of these types and kind of how to actually collect this type of data. Travel tallies are very, basically just teachers asking students, how did you get to here today? So to do a travel tally, you want to coordinate with school staff, often principal or a teacher, have the students, just literally ask students how they got to school that day. You could usually do it for 2 or 3 consecutive days to kind of get a more reliable snapshot in case, one day is like a snow day or something like that. Teachers usually record responses using a simple tally sheet. I'll show an example of that in the next slide. And then we often want to compile these results across classrooms, across the entire school. This process could usually be completed in less than 10 minutes or so per day in the classroom. Here's an example I found of an actual tally sheet that teachers can use. Um, so, a few simple steps can make collecting tallies a lot easier. Just keep clear instructions, provide teachers with something ready to use, like this template here. Identify one school to contact to kind of coordinate, plan ahead, and keep it consistent and make sure that you're using the same method each time to have as clean of data as possible. Um, some challenges, people do have with travel tallies is maybe low teacher participation, inconsistent data collection, potential scheduling conflicts, and missing baseline data. So these are all things you want to make sure that you have, really have teachers on board. You want to make sure you have the baseline data and make sure you have a clear, consistent plan for collecting that data. And thanks for sharing that link in the chat.
Yeah, I also dropped a link to an online travel tally tool called Bike Walk Roll, which I know communities in Colorado have been using it. But for those of you who might be looking for additional travel tally tools and resources, this has been one that Colorado communities have been using.
Great. Thanks for sharing. So just collecting, simple travel tallies is a great way to kind of get some of this baseline data and get a picture of, how many and who's actually walking and biking to school now. Parent caregiver surveys provide really important context, just really helping explain why families are choosing the travel modes that they're choosing. You can distribute surveys through school newsletters, a take-home form, email, other digital ways to share surveys. It's good to provide both digital and paper options to make sure the survey is getting out to everyone, give families enough time to respond, and send reminders to make sure you get that participation. We also talked a bit about crash data. How do we get crash data? So a lot of times state DOT portals, I know Colorado will have this crash data portal where you can click around and kind of put in filters and get to see crash data based on different kinds of geographies or demographic statistics. A lot of states have these portals where that crash data lives. Also, local transportation departments will have a lot of this data. Police departments have data as well as Regional Planning Commission as well, and sometimes Vision Near Zero Net or high injury network maps exist. Here's an example from Boulder County on some of their crash data that they share through their County Vision Zero project. Crash data, like we said, it really helps you identify high risk areas and kind of make the case for your project. For example, are there crashes near a school? Are there high speed roads nearby the school? You don't need, it doesn't need to be some kind of complex analysis. It could be a simple statement like this school is located near a high injury corridor. That can really strengthen your project. Um, Using, for example, Colorado DOT crash data, you could identify that a school is located near a high injury corridor, helps, clearly justify why safety improvements are needed. It's also important to recognize that crash data does have limitations, especially in smaller or rural communities. You might see lower number of reported crashes. That doesn't mean that necessarily conditions are safe there. It's just there's going to be a lower number. There might also be inconsistencies in reporting or gaps in the data in more, rural areas. So it's, important to use crash data paired with other data sources like walk audits, observations, and community input. And here's an example from Denver's High Injury Network map from their Vision Zero action plan. And a walk audit, a great way to really just, go out in the community and get observations of the kind of on the ground conditions around the school area or along the route. To do a walk audit, you don't really need any special tools. You just need a group of people, and a focus of what you're doing. It's really a practical way to kind of understand a student's experience. This is a photo from a walk audit I did with some folks in Oregon a couple of months ago, identifying, hey, actually went out there with a wheelchair to see what it was like. Another thing we've done is like try pushing like a baby stroller and just see what it's like from those different perspectives, or try riding a bike on the route to really understand all of the challenges that students are facing on their way there. To conduct a walk audit, just identify a route, invite partners, school staff, city staff, families, walk the route, take notes, document the issues, and focusing on, what makes it easier or harder for students to walk or bike along that route. And using those findings can really help you identify priority improvements, support your project description, engage partners and decision makers, and strengthen your application. Here's another photo from that walk audit where the not great width on the sidewalk here and very limited visibility on that sign. And that's something you might not realize could be a challenge until you're out there walking it yourself. Maybe you can't get all the data. When is your data good enough to say it's good? It's good enough when you can really identify a problem. It's good enough when you can describe the community, and you can measure change over time. Evaluation, is one of the most important parts of having data. You need to collect baseline data before your project begins. Then you repeat the same data collection after your project's implemented. so that it could look like conducting a travel tally in the fall and then doing it again in the spring, comparing those results and seeing whether more students are walking or biking. Without having that baseline data, it's going to be harder to demonstrate the impact. And here's some evaluation tips that y'all shared in part one of this series. So some of those are start early, keep evaluation in mind from the very beginning. Like we said, always have that baseline data, be consistent, use consistent method over time, track participation regularly, keep it practical, simple. Use metrics that you can control. Don't overthink it. Track participation over weekly tallies. Engage students and schools, get them involved in the data collection. They're going to get more excited about it. It's a learning opportunity to get them involved. Use classroom competitions, incentivize, gamify walking and biking. Communicate your results early and often. Share it with parents and community. Sharing the success is just going to get more people excited to participate. Your timeline of evaluation, you want, of course, before the project, get that baseline travel tally, get surveys, understanding the conditions before the project, during the project, track participation. After the project, again, repeat tallies and do the surveys again, compare our results. So success in kind of data evaluation would look like increased walking and biking, maybe fewer cars dropping off during student drop-off times, increased participation in events, and improved perception of safety. This kind of evaluation really helps you understand if your project's working. And again, keep it simple. Just use one or two data collection tools. Keep it simple. And imperfect data is okay. Just start where you're at. Um, and we can really help this data improve programs by identifying barriers, um, adjusting programs to meet community needs. If our data is showing that, like, okay, we're not getting a lot of participation, think about other reasons why that might be happening. And improve participation and accessibility, refine and expand successful strategies. It can also support future funding requests. Here's some examples of kind of how you could use data to improve programs. For example, caregiver surveys might show a safety concern, which will lead to a walking school bus or crossing guards if the concern is named in a particular location. Travel tallies might show how participation at certain schools might show low participation, which might lead to a targeted outreach in a certain area where the participation might be particularly low. Um, a walk audit might reveal some particular missing sidewalks, which might lead to an improvement in that particular corridor location. A caregiver survey might show low confidence in biking is what's holding people back. So then that might lead to more educational opportunities like a bike rodeo or on-bike skills training. What this looks like in practice of implementation could be like something as simple as launching a walking school bus at one or two schools, conducting just a bike rodeo or safety event, um, doing various classroom education activities, beginning infrastructure improvements, and piloting a new program before further expansion. All right, so now we're going to pass it off to our intern
Uh,
spotlight.
Actually, before you do that, Laura, there are two quick questions in the chat related to data and evaluation. So can I ask you those really quickly? And then Mario, I will get
Yes.
right to you. One question was, do we have a template for a parent survey that we would recommend, like a Safe Routes to School caregiver survey? I think we have. I know that I've done used like a Survey Monkey that and I've just shared the questions with communities, but I think that we have a list of typical questions from the Safe Routes to School caregiver survey that I think we can share out.
Yeah, that's something like I do have a survey that I've used and created. It's specific to the specific community that I've worked on. So I think that is something we could do is kind of make an adjustment for something, just keep the more general questions.
Mhm.
Just, keeping in mind like one of, some surveys might ask about public transportation, but maybe in your community there just currently exists no public transportation. So some of those survey questions might not be relevant for your community. So you might always want to kind of comb through and make sure you're hitting anything that might be specific to your specific community.
Yeah, I'm happy to share our standard caregiver survey if that's helpful. And there's also a question about post evaluation surveys. Like some people will just, send out the same survey again and see if there's been a change over time. Or might ask people, kind of like a before and after, before we did this project, what did you think? What do you think about it now? So I can see if we can pull some examples from post surveys as well. But the standard
Hmm.
caregiver survey I do have, and I can share out in the follow-up email. And we also had one other question about if we've noticed or heard that fear of ICE has impacted school travel behavior and if that's also impacted safe routes school data collection, which we have. We actually did two listening sessions I guess one in February, one in March, about how ICE has impacted safe routes to school programs and program participation and data collection. And so, yes, we have heard that has definitely impacted students being able to walk or bike safely to school, and then will also impact your data as well. And so, I'm happy to share out the recordings from those two sessions as well. And we'll be following up pretty soon with like some actionable tips and next steps. We have found that there have been communities kind of pivoting their data collection just both for accuracy reasons, but probably more importantly, just like student safety and privacy concerns about not wanting to collect a whole lot of data, a whole lot of student data that could potentially lead to unsafe situations for students and families. So there'd been some talk about maybe using more of like heat map data to look at to observe student travel trends, or trying to find other ways to to get more anonymous data of how students are walking and biking to school. And then people have also been using that to inform if they want to do a walking school bus program or think about some safe travel routes. They've been using some of that feedback from communities that have been saying, oh, it doesn't feel safe to walk, to walk or bike to school, to set up more, community support, whether that's a walking school bus program or looking at alternate routes, or other ways they can kind of support communities in getting to school safely, relying on or reaching out to different community partners who might be, who might have other resources or ideas that they can offer. So yeah, I'm happy to follow up and share some of the things that we've been hearing about when it comes to the data collection and ICE enforcement. Good question.
Yep. Also, Melissa dropped in the chat that they have a Colorado parent survey, so
Yeah,
we can add that to our follow-up email to include.
yeah. Last year we also I think we did like a data collection and evaluation webinar that like went a bit deeper into the walk and roll website and the new Colorado survey. So I can see if I can find that recording and just drop it in the chat as well if you want to take a little bit of a deeper look into what's happening in Colorado.
Great.
Good questions. Um, all right, so I'm going to turn things over to a new feature that we have here for our Colorado webinar, and we are going to be doing a Safe Routes Intern Spotlight. And one thing that I love about Safe Routes to School is that we're always like, looking to bring in new people into Safe Routes. And I remember I started with Safe Routes about 8 years ago, brand new to Safe Routes to School. I had no clue what was going on, but I was really eager to learn. So I was like kind of a safe routes newbie. And so I think that for those of us who are on this call, whether you're somebody who's been in safe routes for a long time or somebody who's just starting out, that's obviously valuable to learn a bit about new perspectives in safe routes to school. And it's a way to kind of keep our movement fresh and exciting and engaging, and hopefully bring some new leaders into the safe route space. And so I'd love to welcome Mario Dino, and Mario is an intern at CDOT and has been doing a lot of really wonderful work with Safe Routes to School. And so we hope that Mario is here today. Mario is here today to really offer that, newbie perspective, that really fresh perspective on Safe Routes to School. Maybe help us identify some of the gaps in our knowledge, help us build our capacity and skills, and also grow our movement. We love Safe Routes, want it to continue to be strong for a long time, and that means bringing new people into our Safe Routes universe. So Mario's been working a lot with Safe Routes to School data, research, and analysis. And so I have a few kind of like questions that I wanted to ask Mario, do like a little meet the intern quick fire Q&A. Mario, if you're up for that, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so like Mario, one of our like typical safe route to school questions we always ask everybody is, how did you get to school growing up?
So I went to Denver Public Schools till first grade, and my mom really wanted to implement a walking and biking to school because I lived so close to that school. So she actually got an attachment for her bicycle where it was kind of a third wheel, and I'd ride on that. And then once I transferred out of the DPS system, I did a lot of carpooling. I know parents they don't want to have to drive their kids to school every day necessarily. So it's nice to get, hey, environmental here and do carpooling. And then once I got into high school, I took the bus a few times, which is nice.
Awesome. And good on your mom for kind of getting that biking into you early. I know that we see a lot of, a lot more families that are using biking as a way to get to school. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that. And also sharing how it kind of changes over time, right? Like when you're little, you might be traveling with a parent, but as you get older, you kind of become a bit more independent and can start walking on your own or taking the bus. So, that's a really cool journey. Okay, so Mario, I know that one of the things you've been working on with CDOT is looking into a lot of data, and you're basically tasked with looking at like 20 years of safe routes to school data, which is a long time and a lot of data to kind of like look at and pour over. And so, like here at Safe Routes, we're a lot of us who are, looking at data and looking at these large data sets and are trying to figure out, what are we looking at and how can you piece all of it together? And so I'm really curious if you could kind of share maybe two or three ways that you've looked at the data. So like, for example, have you looked at, geography or population or age or location, maybe like two or three kind of like lenses that you've used to, kind of like sort through this massive data set that you've been working with.
Yeah, so I first started with urban versus rural.
Mm,
Delineating the two between transportation planning regions and metropolitan planning organizations. Colorado, very much Metro Denver is where the population is concentrated. So really figuring out where the population is and necessarily where it's not going to be
hmm
in the future.
Yeah, yes, looking at like urban versus rural, which we think a lot about here with Safe Routes too. I think somebody in the chat said, I really want to reach rural communities, right? So being able to see like, where people are, or maybe even to like where people are moving. We've seen a lot of people look at data sets and think about like, moving trends and, how that relates to where we put schools or build sidewalks. So I love that. I love that lens. And another thing that you did as a part of your time at CDOT has been looking at a lot of like background research, background information, a lot of like safe routes to school tools and resources as somebody who's new to safe routes. And so I'm sure that you looked at like a lot of really cool stuff. And I'm really curious to know if there's, maybe one or two resources that stuck out to you, like, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that before. Or this is really exciting. I'd love to share this, this tool or this resource with other people. So if there's something that kind of like stuck out as you've been digging a bit more into safe routes to school.
Yeah, one of the suburbs in Denver, Littleton, they did a really good map of route planner if you want to walk or bike to school. That was very informative to me, and I think it's a really simple way to show people, hey, these are the routes to walk or bike to school if you don't already know. And then the other one I looked at that I really liked was California's rural school safe route to school plan. This was done in 2015, but it's a really extensive document that has a lot of great information about how projects will differ, rural versus urban, and how commutes will as well.
Yeah, and Mario, I think that you shared is it the Littleton like the Littleton travel planner? I think that you
Yes,
shared it with me.
yes.
Okay, I'm gonna see if I can drop that link in the chat because that's a really great example of how a city is, kind of thinking about school travel planning in a really intentional way. Or if Mario, if you have it pulled up, you're welcome to share it, but I can pull it up and share it in the chat as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I can go share it.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I think that'd be really helpful. If any of you all were in our webinar in November with Josh Stewart and Dr. Maria Mant, that was they kind of talked about some examples of creating safer streets in Littleton. So we can drop that in the chat. Um, and then kind of going along with this, Mario, one thing that you were asked to do was you were asked to look at different school traffic safety plans and, kind of figuring out what traffic safety plans are out there. And for those of you who might not be familiar with traffic safety plans, it's basically, the steps that schools can take to improve safety when there are kids, kind of, during arrival, dismissal, walking, biking, and rolling to school. And so I'm curious, did you find a lot of examples of school travel plans and or traffic plans? And if you did what did they look like? Were they any good? Tell us what you found.
Yeah, so I realized that a lot of the school safety plans will not be posted on websites. They'll be distributed through PTA meetings, stuff like that. I did found a few close to my house. One was really good that showed biking, walking destinations where kids will park their bikes, as well as a school bus map and uh, parents that want to drop their kids off really quickly versus parents that want to park. I think it really matters about whether it's an urban school or a rural school will be a big difference.
Awesome. Yeah, that's something that we've been thinking about a lot. Kind of how can we improve these traffic safety plans and number one, encourage communities to create them and then also create really good ones. So I was curious to see kind of, what you saw in your research. And thanks for dropping the Littleton example in the chat. And I'll also share the rural tool with communities as well in my follow-up email. Mario, like you said, it's kind of a bigger document, so it might be one that will be better for a follow-up email. But those of you who are interested in that, I'm happy to share. Actually, Mario, I have one more question for you that I didn't put in my original list, but I hope that it's an easy one, hopefully. Like I said, our movement really relies on, bringing new people into safe routes, and you've done so much to contribute to, CDOT and safe routes in Colorado. And so I'm curious if you're going to stick around the safe routes world for a while, or what might you do with all that you've learned from your safe routes experience?
Yeah, without a doubt, I want my career to be in safety, transportation safety. That's a big thing for me. I don't really love to drive, so it's if we can get more people walking and biking in a safe manner, I definitely am for that.
Awesome, good stuff. We're happy to have you be a part of our safe routes movement. And I've actually heard from a lot of people, a lot of younger people, that driving actually isn't as big of a priority as some other things, that people kind of want these walkable, bikeable spaces. So we love to hear that and have you be a part of our movement. Thanks so much, Mario. Appreciate all the work you did with CDOT. Thank you so much for being here. I know Wendy and Melissa are on from CDOT as well, and definitely appreciate your contributions to our Safe Routes world. For those of you who are on the call who, you might be new to Safe Routes, or maybe you're working with, a Safe Routes intern or a Vista, or thinking about bringing in somebody to your Safe Routes program. These new perspectives are really important. They make they make us better. They make our work better. And it's always just nice to kind of get those new and fresh ideas. So I definitely encourage you all to, reach out to some new Safe Routes people in your community and see what ideas they might bring to the table. So we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up here. Just a few last minute reminders. I also saw there was a question in the chat about project budgets. I'm happy to follow up and share some information about budgets after. Honestly, a lot of it kind of depends on what you're applying for, the type of projects you're doing. Obviously, big infrastructure projects are a lot more expensive than some of the smaller non-infrastructure projects, but I'm happy to, yeah, share some takeaways about project budgets and what people are asking for when it comes to their grants. So a few key takeaways as we wrap up for today, and then a few next steps. So we encourage you all to build really strong Safe Routes projects that will include cross-sector partnerships, data-driven decision-making, pre and post-evaluation, ongoing engagement, and then clear implementation steps. And lastly, a few next steps that you all can think about. Continue to develop your Safe Routes to School action plan or project ideas. Look into the data in your communities, find partners to help you move forward and help strengthen your project, and prepare for upcoming Safe Routes to School funding opportunities, whether that's in Colorado or in the community that you live in. And then, of course, there are a bunch of additional resources and support. Obviously, CDOT has really great resources on their website. We can share that as well. You're welcome to look at our past webinars and materials. I'll send out links to this one and a few other ones in my follow-up email, and also your local and regional partners. We're all doing this work together, and it takes all of us to be successful. So reach out to your community, your people, and see what support is, it's available in the areas where you live. And with that, I believe we are done for today. So keep an eye out, please, for follow-up resources from us. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Laura and I will share information in the follow-up email as well. Again, big thank you to CDOT for sponsoring this webinar. Huge thank you to Mario for coming and sharing your perspectives and your ideas as a CDOT intern. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. We wish you well as you plan out your projects and gear up for a lot of spring fun, whether that's bike to school day or bike and roll to work day, whatever you have going on over the next few months. We wish you a successful time with that. And you're always welcome to reach out to us if you have any questions or need support. So we will see you all next month. Have a great one, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.